Welcome to Pipeline Planning Smart Talent Development Strategies. I'm Joanne Smichael, and I am delighted that you chose this session for part of your virtual learning with the American Healthcare Association. This virtual learning is really something, isn't it? It's new territory for me and it's new territory for you. So I hope that you'll be patient with me. There will be points in this session where I'm going to stumble and bumble and just make mistakes. So please, please, please be patient with me. As we look at this very first slide, it captures the session description. It captures what you have already on your handout, but I want to talk about it just a little bit. The reason that we're doing this session is because you in the post-acute care, long-term care world, aging services, whatever you define your organization as, don't have the luxury of not attending to your human talent. You've got to be thinking very strategically about how you manage your talent. In this session, my goal is to give you a comprehensive approach to doing that and some strategies that you can actually use for creating a pipeline and for clearing the sludge from your existing pipeline. So, as we move forward, I'd like for you to stop and think. There is a point I really want to just stop and emphasize here. And that is, what have you done intentionally to create a pipeline? What are you doing to make sure that you have people lined up for key positions? And I'm not just talking about the nursing home administrator or the director of nursing. I'm talking about all of the key positions in the organization. Now, some of you are probably thinking, doesn't she know how hard it is to get people to come to work in long term care? Doesn't she know that I'm in a little small town in Nebraska and we don't have a big talent pool here? I do know that. But I also know that you've got to think creatively. You've got to invite new solutions. You've got to invite innovation so that you can begin to create a pipeline. And this is your starting point, really thinking about creating your pipeline. In this next short video presentation that's getting ready to come up, you're going to have an opportunity to see a graphic, kind of gross, illustration of why and how we do the pipeline. We're going to look at how we go from being a moth to a butterfly. Not really a moth, that other thing, the caterpillar. So now we see how it happens, how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. I forgot something. I forgot to tell you something at the beginning. Don't wait to the end for your questions. Use your chat feature or your question and answer feature at any point, especially at the points where I'm raising questions and at the points where you have questions or you have insights that you want to share. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that at the beginning, but remember, this is as new to me as it is to you. I still haven't gotten used to this. I'm used to being in front of people. So, the reason that you are investing the time and the energy in developing a pipeline is because you've got all these caterpillars in your organization that have the potential to become butterflies. The other reason that you're doing it is that, believe it or not, you have caterpillars that surround your organization at the local community college, in the local high schools, who would love an opportunity to work in this most noble profession. And I say that not lightly. I truly believe that long term care is the most noble profession. We're dealing with people at the end of their lives, usually, when they are most vulnerable and when they are most fragile. So, this is the most noble profession. As we move forward onto the next slide, there are three pretty deep questions that I'd like for you to consider and that I invite you to really think about and to take a minute to jot down your answers to the questions and then to share them in the chat feature or the question and answer feature, whatever your technology has. Because I'd like for us to, as much as possible in this session, interact around the questions. So the first question is this: do you really have a pipeline for key positions? And what that means is not that you have an heir apparent. It means that you're cultivating people who are on a growth track from multiple positions in every department. So, do you have that for key positions? The second question is: are the people in the pipeline the right people? Do they represent the attitude, the aptitude, and the commitment that's required to move your organization and to move this long term care profession into the future? And the third question is: as an organization, are you really willing to allocate resources? And that means your time, your money, your energy to developing people. What that means is that you do more than the state or federally mandated training, that you really invest in people, invest in their careers, invest in their lives, and invest in their humanity. What I'd like for you to do, and I'm aware that we're in a virtual environment and this might seem kind of weird for a minute, but what I'd like for you to do is to just take a second, reflect on each question, and then think about who you're going to present them to after this session. Whoever that person is, they're going to be your first collaborator in thoughtful pipeline planning. Now, as you're thinking, you may have it in your head that, well, I got to take that question back to the HR department. Not necessarily. There may be other collaborators that you need in your organization. I want to just stop and emphasize that for a minute. Just a minute here. When we begin to think seriously about collaboration and collaborators, we have to think beyond what is traditional in the organization. We have to think about, who could I partner with that I've never partnered with before, who also has an interest in moving the organization forward, in protecting the organization and protecting this industry or this profession? Who could that be? It's not necessarily just the HR person. There are lots of people of like minds in your organization that you need to have conversations with. If you represent a large corporation that has many, many, many buildings, The question becomes, can we think beyond this corporate office and invite insights from people in the field about what we need to do to develop viable talent pipelines? So I'd like for you to give serious thought to that. And then I want you to take those three questions back and use them as starting points for action. Now, when I say starting points for action, I don't mean that I want you to just run back and jump right into the questions. What I mean is that I want you to thoughtfully analyze the questions, think about your organizational context, and think about where it makes sense to begin and who you might want to begin with. Who you might want to begin with. Who's your collaborator going to be? I'd like to just move forward a little bit. Our next slide is about career paths. Career paths. You know, we all have multiple ways to go. We always have options. We have options in our career, we have options in every area of our lives. So, I want to begin thinking seriously about career paths. The first thing that we have to answer is, what is a career path? A career path is a choice. First thing it is a choice. Once it's a choice that's been made, then people can decide, I want to go in this direction. So, for instance, I used to have wonderful pleasure of working with a woman. Her name's Denise Chaotti, and she's with Opus Senior Services Group down there in Tampa. Denise started out as a social work assistant. Then Denise became the director of social work. Now, you might think that that was her career path, that she was just going to go on the social work track. Well, in fact, she had an opportunity to have a conversation with the administrator at the time and said, I want to study for my NHA. I don't want to stay in the social work world. And she studied for her NHA, became an NHA, and then decided that she wanted to do some work at the corporate office. And that's where her career path took her. So, career paths are identified by the person, not by the organization. Sometimes we think that people want to stay in their current field, but in reality, not every CNA wants to become an RN. Not every social worker wants to become the director of social work. The career path that people select should be selected by them and not imposed by you. Now, I want to repeat that because I think it's very important. I think we make the mistake of tracking people. The career path that a person selects is something that they select. It's not something that you impose upon them. I'd like to stress a couple more things about career paths and why they matter. I really want to emphasize just a couple more things. Career pathing is a great opportunity to examine each and every position in the organization and then to dissect it and figure out, what are the steps that are required to get there? What are the steps? Now, this doesn't just mean promotions that are required to get there. It's about things like, what do you have to know? What types of skills do you have to have? What types of abilities do you need? What level of education do you need? What are the licensing requirements? What are the credentials that are needed to get into and be successful in that position? Let's think about it. Think about somebody who decides that they want to be on the marketing team at your facility or in your company. Well, we know they need a personality, okay? So when we're talking to people about a potential career path in marketing, one of the things that we have to talk about is that you do have to be effervescent. You do have to be tenacious. You do have to be relationship oriented. Those are things that need to be explicitly stated when we're talking with people about career paths. We need to talk not just about the formal things, but about the informal things that will enable them to be successful. I think it's also really important to be honest with people about how much time it will take to move from being the social work assistant to the director of social work, that it's not an overnight thing. We often, particularly in this age of instancy, everything's got to be fast, fast, fast. Respond to that text today, respond to that text when you got it. In this era of immediacy, we have to explain to people that things take time. Things take time. Being on a career path means that the person is investing in themselves and that the organization is investing in them. I want to talk for a little bit about the investment in the organization. Often, when I start talking about this, people will say to me, "Well, Joanne, you know how high our turnover rate is in this industry. You know how high it is." I do. But what I also know is that organizations that have been wise about investing in people have greater retention, much greater retention. So, if you're not experiencing some such great retention, this might be the time for you to think about, hmm, what are we doing to invest in people? What are we doing to show people that there's a future here for them? What are we doing to show people that they're valued and valuable? I'd like for you to just take a couple of seconds and jot down somewhere your answers to those questions. What are we doing to show people that we're invested in them? What are we doing to show people that they're valued and valuable? What are those things? What are those things? If you're drawing a blank, that's a really good starting point for you. It's a really good starting point. It's important to begin to show people that they matter because they won't get on a career path in your organization if they don't feel that they're valued and valuable. They won't get on a career path if they don't feel like somewhere, somehow, there's a future for them. I want to move on just a little bit in thinking about this whole notion of a career path. They need to be made available to each and every employee. Employees need to really review the path and think about, would I fit here? Would I fit there? Would I do well in this environment? Would I do well in that environment? They also need to be encouraged by you, the leader, to test and to try different things. When people feel like they're stuck in a box, that's when they start looking around seeking other opportunities. So it's important for you to give people a chance to maybe shadow the social worker, shadow one of the dietary people, maybe shadow the recreations person. Now, that would be fun, shadowing the recreations person, but really giving them the opportunity to look at and explore the wide range of options and opportunities in long term care. One of the, I don't know if I want to call it a black mark or not, but just one of the impediments that this post acute care world has to deal with is that many people think it's a dead end and that it's not a desirable or a sexy kind of career. I don't agree with that. I think it is whatever your organization makes it for people. If you choose to make it boring, if you choose to lock people in a box, well, then it will be boring and they will be locked in a box. But if you choose to make it interesting and you choose to give them lots of opportunities to explore, they will value that. They will value that. This is a point where I'd like to just ask you again to stop and think, what kinds of opportunities do you see for people in your organization? Who could shadow whom? What are the things that you could do to make exploration of career paths fun, to make it a part of enhancing the morale in the organization, to make it a part of how you help people connect to one another and connect and commit to your organization? Ultimately, when we're creating career paths, what we're talking about is helping people commit and connect to each other and to the organization. So I'd like for you to just really stop and think about, what would we have to do to make that happen? And again, I mentioned this earlier, who will you collaborate with? Who will you collaborate with? How will you collaborate with them? What are the things that you will do to create some energy around this whole idea of a pipeline? How will you make it interesting? What will you do to make it come to life in your organization? I'm going to move to the next slide. And the next slide actually references the handout that you have. So I'd like to talk about the worksheet that's on your handout and just walk you through it and give you some opportunities to begin thinking about how you're going to use it. So it's a sample career path worksheet. And let me tell you what it is. I know that you can read, I know that you can read it, but I want to walk you through it just a little bit so that it's easier for you to use when you get back to the organization. So just take a minute and look it over. If there are questions that are coming up in your mind, please do not forget to use the chat. While I'm on this crazy video thing, you know that right this minute, while you're seeing this, I'm also virtually right there with you, responding to your chats. So please chat your questions in, your comments, your insights. So let's walk through the worksheet. The first thing that it asks you to do is to identify, what's the position. What is the position that the person, are interested in? And then the next column asks you to look at the steps that are required to reach the position and the resources that are available from the organization to support the goal attainment. So when we look at the steps required ask us to examine the level of education, what's the licensure, what are the additional credentials, what are the skills, what are the physical abilities. And as you look at that far right hand column, for each of those things, what we're asking is, what's the organization willing to do to help the employee get the level of education, to get the license, to get the credentials, to develop the skills? Because this is a partnership between you and the employee. It's a partnership. I really want to stress that it is a partnership. It is not something that you're imposing on them. It's a partnership. And as you think about this, as I emphasize this even more, you've got to think about who will be the best and most appropriate leaders in the organization to almost hold the hand of and guide the employees through their developmental journey. Sometimes it will be their immediate supervisor. Sometimes it will be maybe someone from the department that they want to move into. Who knows who it's going to be? It might be the administrator, but you've got to think about who those partners are going to be. And when you're having these conversations with employees on this career path worksheet, you got to be straight about the fact that there is a skill set that's required. There's a disposition. I mentioned the fact earlier that you can't be in marketing and be shy and reserved and afraid to talk to people. So you've got to talk about some of those innate things and the skills that will make or break them in the role that they're looking for. Now, I want to be cautious here about physical abilities. You know that we live in a society where people will sue you for sneezing in their direction. So you've got to be thoughtful about how you approach what are the physical abilities that are required for the position. They need to be very cut and dry, okay? They need to be very cut and dry. We can't say silly things like, you know, you're not tall enough to reach that top shelf, so you could never be the maintenance director. We can't say silly things like that. We've got to be sure that the physical abilities are bona fide and that they make sense and that we're having fact based conversations about that. The next piece that I want to stress from the worksheet is the whole notion of mentoring. When an employee has identified a role that they might want to explore, it is so important to get them a mentor. It is so important for them to have the opportunity to talk with someone who is already in the role about their experiences, about what's going well, about what's not going well, about shortcuts that they took to get where they are, about the things that they find fulfilling in their work. The other benefit of having the mentor is it's a continuous growth opportunity for the employee. It gives them continued opportunities to learn, to develop a deeper understanding of the work that they want to do. When you think about mentoring, do not assume that everyone can do it because everyone can't. And if you're going to use formal mentors in your organization, I urge you, shoot, I even beg you to make sure that they have been adequately trained. Do not assume because someone is an outstanding dietary manager that they are equipped to mentor the dietary aide. Do the work to develop the mentoring competencies in your organization. So, what are some of the skills that a mentor needs? One, they need to be able to listen, like to really just be quiet and listen. Number two, they need to understand that they are not the role model for the world. Okay? Because sometimes when people get into these mentoring roles and responsibilities, they begin to see themselves as, everybody wants to be just like me, and I'm going to grow my own mini me, and I'm going to teach them everything I know, and they're going to be just like me. Get over yourself. Just get over yourself. When we are finding mentors and training people to be mentors, what we want is some degree of humility. The other thing that a mentor needs is up to date, current knowledge. These are people who stay on top of what's emerging both in the larger post acute care world and in their specific discipline. So, you want somebody who is alive and alert and active in their own profession and in their own career so that they can mentor the other person. One of the mistakes that I see a lot in organizations is we assign mentors based on their longevity with the company. I don't think that's wise. Sometimes people have stayed because nobody else would hire them. That's the truth. You know it, I know it. So we want to assign a mentor who is still on fire for the work and still on fire for the company. I'd like for you to just take a moment and think about who would be good mentors for which roles in your organization. Just take a minute and reflect on that. As you reflect on that, I'd like for you to think about what kind of development would that person or those people need to excel as a mentor? Really think about that. And I invite you to use the chat feature to share some of the things, the kinds of development that you believe people need to mentor well and to mentor successfully. Use that feature. I also encourage you to start reading on mentoring and coaching yourself. Spend some time really exploring those concepts because they're so important in pipeline planning. And if you're serious as an organization about setting up pipelines, then these are some skills that we need to develop in leaders at all levels. So, we've talked a little bit about mentoring and how important that is in career pathing, but also in the whole idea of pipeline planning. The next thing that I do not want us to forget is how important it is to allow the employees to ask questions and to remind them that their questions are not only invited, but they're important because the questions reveal where they are developmentally and what they need to know. So the questioning piece is important. It's important that you solicit their questions, that you encourage and really pull them into good dialogue about what it is that they want. It's also important that you understand that as they evolve and grow on this whole career path, their questions are going to change. Their questions are going to change. The other thing that it's important to know is this: their mentors should change too. This is the example I like to give. When you were playing Little League baseball, you had a coach and a mentor who was great when you were in Little League. When you moved from Little League baseball to the team at your high school, hopefully you had a different coach and a different mentor because your skills had advanced. And if you made it to the pros, you certainly had a different coach and a different mentor. Well, the same applies when we're looking at people in the organization. Don't assume that the same person is going to mentor them throughout their development. I actually have to tell you, I think it's healthy for people to have different mentors because no one person can provide all of the insights, all of the ideas that a person needs. Everybody comes at this with different exposures, different experiences. So when they have different mentors, they have the opportunity to glean different things from all of these different sources. So I encourage you as you start thinking about mentoring to make sure that you give people opportunities to have different mentors to see different approaches. As we return to the slides, I'm going to start talking just a little bit about um, how we start this whole strategy and how we begin to use a very strategic approach rather than a seat of the pants kind of approach. So, the first step, and this is another point where I really encourage you to use the chat feature to ask your questions. The first step in the strategy is assessing the organization, really dispassionately doing an organizational assessment. Some of the questions that are critical are what you need to be successful in the future. And I'm not just talking about revenue and, more buildings and no, I'm talking about what do you need in terms of talent, in terms of human capital to be successful in the future. The talent that you have today can be leveraged and built upon to ensure future success. Now, as you continue in your organizational assessment, the next thing that you're going to be asking is, so when we look around the organization, what talent is readily available? Who are the caterpillars? Who are the caterpillars? And you might be asking yourself, well, how am I supposed to know who the caterpillars are? Look around and find the people who are quietly doing a really good job. No fanfare, they're just doing a really good job. Look around the organization and look at the people who ask questions. Who ask questions. Sometimes we think that every time a person asks a question, it's challenging us. No, they're asking questions because they want to learn, they want to know more, they want to do more. So look for the people who have that intellectual curiosity. Those are some of your caterpillars who are primed to be butterflies. Look at those people. Now, what I'm getting ready to say is going to sound a little strange to you. Look at the people who are the biggest pains in the butt. Sometimes those people just need to have their energy channeled in a productive way. So don't discount people who get on your nerves. Don't discount people who have had disciplinary problems in the past. Consider this: if you redirect their energy, they will bring something different to the organization. I am not saying that every pain in the neck employee can be salvaged, but what I am saying is that some of them can. And it takes skillful leadership to do that. And as you begin thinking about this pipeline, an employee that you have been able to skillfully turn around will commit. An employee that you have been able to turn around will be your best advocate and your best advertisement for how you invest in people in your organization. I want to ask you to think about this. What does potential look like in your organization? Because when we start doing the organizational assessment, it's important to identify what is potential here. What does potential really look like for us? What does potential look like? Think about that for a minute and share some of your insights on what potential looks like in your organization. Chat them into me. I'd like to hear them. I'd like to hear them. And I'd also like for you to, if you're in a room with people from your organization, talk about these questions amongst yourselves as we're going through this experience. Ask each other, what does potential look like for us? The next question that really captures how you're going to tackle this organizational assessment is simply this: how are you going to begin the process of an organizational assessment? Whose support and what resources do you need? Now, here's a funny thing: people think when I ask that question, because I'm a consultant, that that means that I'm saying, hey, hire me. Well, I do not believe that you always need an external consultant to do a good organizational assessment. I believe that you may very well have the tools and the talent that you need right there to assess your own organization. All right. I want to move to the talent assessment. We're going to stay on this slide for a minute, but I want to talk about the talent assessment. I like 360 inventories to let people get those instruments, help people to get how they're perceived in the organization. But you can also use things like Myers Briggs and Strength Finders because they're good starting points for assessing the talent. I am also a big fan of something called RBS, Reflected Best Self. It's born out of the positive psychology world and appreciative inquiry, and it asks people to assess themselves when they have really rocked, to get data and feedback from friends, from family, from colleagues about times when they have really shined. So, RBS is another, Reflective Best Self is another great way and great tool for people to begin to look at themselves and to begin examining who they are. This whole notion of self assessment is critical to understanding people's developmental goals and their career objectives. The other thing that it does is it helps you measure for values alignment. It helps you decide who should be in what role. Who should be in what role? So, the questions that I'd like for you to consider here are, hmm, how are we going to begin the talent assessment process? Whose support and what resources do we need? As we move into the executive development plan and the individual development plan, there are a few things that I really want to emphasize and stress. And these are things that, yep, they are on your handout, but I want to spend some in-depth time here stressing them. So, what is an EDP or an IDP, an executive development plan or an individual development plan? It's a tailored map that helps the employee have clarity. It gives them a real framework for developing their talent. It's not to be taken lightly. It should address their career objectives, their goals, their learning, the experiences that they need, the civic engagement that they need, the professional engagement that they need, the networking that has to happen, and it should address their own strategic positioning for their career. And their own strategic positioning may have absolutely nothing to do with what you imagine for them. Because remember, as we go back to thinking about career pathing, it's very individualized. It gives people voice in the development of their lives. Okay. So, this executive development plan or individual development plan is something that they do. You give them the worksheet or the rubric, but they actually complete it. In the best case scenario, after they've completed their IDP or their EDP, they sit down and talk with their mentor about the whole process and where they want to go and how they want to get there. I think it's important to review the development plans quarterly with an emphasis on what did they do well, what were their victories, what have they learned, and what are the options that are available. In some organizations, managers, supervisors, leaders will have the desire, the skills, and the ability to do this with their employees, and others, they won't. In others, it really will become the responsibility of the mentor. It's important for you to work in your organization to develop a customized, viable executive development plan or individual development plan. It's going to look different in every organization. However, the things that I mentioned before, got to have a career objective, got to have goals, got to have learning, got to have some experiences that we want them to get. Those things are critical. Those pieces I think are foundational in any good EDP or IDP. Now, there's a little bit more that I want to stress here. All of this, in my mind, needs to be integrated into your performance management system. One of my observations in the post acute care world, aging services, is that your performance management systems are really outdated. You rely on these once a year assessments, and that does absolutely nothing. It's just checking a box. I'm a big believer in creating a coaching culture where people sit down with their supervisors at least quarterly to talk about their successes, to talk about their opportunities for growth. Sometimes people will say to me, "Do you think I have time to sit with every employee quarterly?" Make the time. If they were messing up, you'd make the time to have a conversation with them. So, how about if we use this to preempt problems? So I encourage you to really take a look at your performance management system because it may be part of the reason that you're not experiencing awesome retention. The last piece here that I want to cover before we move on is broaden and build experiences. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Part of the pipeline and the career pathing really needs to be opportunities for people to broaden their skill set, to build on what they know. That is the kind of experience that keeps people engaged. It deepens their commitment to your organization. So the question is, what are the special assignments that we can give people either in the facility, at the corporate office? Maybe you can send them to American Healthcare Association to do some kind of internship. Maybe they can become advocates in the legislature. They can go to lobby days. There's a million experiences that you can ensure that people have. And these experiences do a few things. Number one, they increase employee confidence. When I am allowed, permitted, encouraged to go do something beyond the sphere or the scope of my regular work, you better believe I get more confident. You better believe that. It also increases what they know. They become more competent because they've had these opportunities to be out and about, to learn from other people, to grow. I believe that broaden and build experiences have to be unique to the person's developmental interests and their needs. There's no point sending someone to lobby day when they have absolutely no interest in being an advocate for your profession. So ask people, what kinds of additional experiences would turn you on? What kinds of additional experiences would you enjoy? Come to them also, because sometimes when you ask that question, people are going to be like, huh? I don't know. I never thought about that. So it's useful to have already thought some through and to have a list and to be able to ask people, does this appeal to you? Does this appeal to you? Is this something you'd like to do? Really help people to begin to think about the special assignments that can help them grow into and prepare for the next position. The other thing I think it's important to understand is the next position may not be a promotion, it may be a lateral move. We get confused with pipeline planning and think everything is moving up the ladder. It's not. Some people are perfectly content at the level they're at. They just want different experiences. They just don't want to be bored. They don't want to feel stuck. So, part of the pipeline work is to just give people the opportunity to have experiences. The other question is, who would be a good resource for identifying interesting broaden and build experiences? Who would that resource be? Think about that. Again, I'm encouraging you to use your chat feature. What are the special assignments that you think would be fun, would be interesting, would be challenging for people in your organization? Think about that. Share some of them with us in the chat. I would like to move forward to uh, something that has become really, really challenging for us in our society right about now, and that's diversity. That's diversity. And this is something that, we can keep skirting it and pretend that there are no diversity issues. We can tell the lie that we don't see color, that we think everybody's the same, that we don't have any unconscious biases. But those are lies that we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better. So, what we're going to talk about now is the diversity factor and what it means in relation to your pipeline. One of the things I love about the graphic on the slide that you're looking at right now is that it does such an awesome job capturing the range of diversity. We often get stuck and think that diversity is about race and it's about gender. Well, yeah, those are pieces of it, but it is so much broader than that. And I need to emphasize that point. It's very important, and I really want to stress that point. Diversity, diversity. It is about things like national origin, veteran service, your ability, your disability, how you identify sexually, your politics, your age. All of these things are components of diversity. Your level of education, all of those things, the traumas that you've endured in your life, all of those things are components of diversity. Your approach to the work and to the world, how you perceive work, is a component of diversity. We limit ourselves when we can only think about race, gender, race, gender, sexual orientation. It is so much broader than that. Now, I'm assuming that your organization has a genuine commitment to inclusion, to equity. And if you do, your pipelines will be intentionally diverse, intentionally, because it doesn't happen by accident. And when we're building an intentionally diverse pipeline, we look around the organization and are honest about where is it homogenous. There's a term that I use that sometimes gets on people's nerves, but if it gets on your nerves, you might want to figure out why it gets on your nerves. It's called occupational ghetto. This is when all of our low wage, low status positions are occupied by people of a certain ethnicity or of certain ethnicities. Typically, they are Black and Brown people, recent immigrants. So, really examining the diversity factor means that you have to have the courage to look at your organization and say, do we have occupational ghettos? What does our middle management look like? What do our frontline supervisors look like? Do we have real diversity throughout this organization? And this is going to prick some of you, but is our senior leadership all one way? Are they all men? Are they all women? Are they all white? Are they all over 50? What does our board composition look like? These are difficult questions. They make some people squirm. Some people have probably just turned me off right about there, but they're important questions. They're important questions. And I don't ask them to alienate you, I ask them to help you wake up to the diversity issues that are real in the organization. Your organization and the people in your pipeline will benefit from having a wide range of diversity. You know, when we have diversity, what we get are varied approaches. We get in the possibility of innovation. We get new and different perspectives. We have different opportunities. When everything's homogenous, we know what we're going to get. So I encourage you strongly to address the diversity factor in your pipeline. There are a few questions that I want you to get comfortable asking related to addressing diversity. And they are, and I think we're going to go back to the slide for this. I think there's a good slide. And if there's not a good slide on this, there's definitely, there we go. There is definitely, it's definitely covered in your handout. And if you have questions about how do we begin to deal with diversity in a way that pulls people together instead of pulling them apart, be sure and chat those questions as well, because I think that those are the questions that we need to begin to grapple with as peace loving people. I think that we have been far too divisive and have just suffered from being polarized. So I encourage you to chat those questions. So understand that inclusion requires intention, it does not happen by accident. The first question is, are we holding ourselves accountable to being inclusive in our pipelines, to being inclusive in our organizations? Or do we just like lip service? You know, do we just want to put out a nice little diversity statement? So that's the first question. The second question is, I alluded to it a minute ago, do we have occupational ghettos? And if we do, what are we willing to do to address this? What are we willing to do? The last question is, how can we make our commitment to inclusion clear to every employee, to every stakeholder, so that they see the range of possibilities available to them in our company's pipelines? There's no way to deal with pipelines and growing organizations without dealing with diversity, without being straight about it. Well, our time together is just about over, and I'm sorry to see it end. I invite you to continue the conversation with me in chat. I'm happy to stay here and to stay around. We started out by defining what a pipeline is and identifying how important it is in an organization. We spent time really looking at this whole idea of how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly and what a messy little process it is. And then we looked at what's a career path? How do we do it? And I hope that you will use the worksheet that I provided to begin thinking about developing career paths in your organization. We had the opportunity to move to a strategic approach, which includes IDPs, individual development plans, and executive development plans. We also talked about assessing the climate of the organization. Those are really important pieces if we're going to be thoughtful, comprehensive, and strategic in addressing pipeline planning. The last piece is a piece that is near and dear to the heart of all peace loving people, and that is addressing diversity in our pipelines and throughout our organization. My hope, my most sincere hope, is that you will have gotten a tool, a strategy, a technique from this session, and that you will use it, use it, use it, and use it again. If this is a topic that really kind of turns you on and piques your curiosity, I invite you to go to my podcast channel because there's a podcast about this and all these related things. So go podcast and listen to the thoughts on this and additional strategies. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming.